This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Kyle Buckett. He is a retired Navy SEAL. His new book, Leadership Is Overrated, How the Navy SEALs and Successful Businesses Create Self-Leading Teams That Win. One of those fun conversations that I am quite lucky to have. Now, there's going to be a few beeps here in the beginning because just through the random act of being alive, Kyle and I actually had a mutual connection, even though today was the first time that we have ever spoken. How cool is that? Look out for those beeps. You'll never get to know what's behind them. With no further delay from me, let's jump right in with Kyle Buckett and talk some leadership. Leadership that's often overrated. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I'll take it right back to San Diego. I was living in San Diego from 2008 to 2012. Then I came to Asia.
Nice. I was there. What part were you in?
I was living at...
Dude, I was at... I don't know if you remember the...
Yes.
That's where my wife and I were living at the time. So you and I were literally neighbors 3 blocks away.
I will not reveal any names, but I have a sneaky suspicion, given the close proximity, a close associate of yours was actually living in my building.
Who are your buddies from San Diego?
SEAL-wise?
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen in a long time. He's a good mug. That's awesome. Small world.
It's funny because he was living in my building and I do these trading books. I've actually introduced him to a bunch of traders and I think he's followed up. I had no earthly idea about any of his background. And he was hanging out with somebody in my building. And then we were just hanging out at that place across the street. When he's like you, so he's got his head shaved. So I'm not even thinking military. And he's not carrying himself in that way at all. I had no clue what his background was. And it was only after a long period of time that I finally found out what he was up to.
That's great. He's such a good dude. You found yourself a real good one. Top of the food chain right there. Good guy.
It's sad. I mean, I loved walking those streets and I mean, it was great. And I just imagine the streets have been ruined now.
Yeah, Todd Gloria stepped in and he was not helpful as a mayor. The city has just crumbled under his leadership. It's crumbled as what I believed was one of America's greatest and most beautiful cities. I mean, one of 7 Mediterranean climates on the planet. And it's just 40,000 homeless people that you're stepping over when you're going to a Padres game.
I think it rained 4 or 5 times in 4 years. It was crazy. So listen, here's where I want to take you to start. We'll get into the book and everything, but you seem like a pretty personable guy. And I think you ultimately probably know that a good conversation that really gets into perhaps you is going to end up selling more books than you and I going through the table of contents. We'll see what you're willing to open up to, but I would love for you to take me back to an early time. And I do this with guests sometimes, and I don't know what that early moment should be. When did you enter the Navy? How old were you?
If this is too far back, please stop me. But I was 17 years old. I was getting ready to join the Army. I was really jazzed about the Army. I grew up across the river from West Point in the Hudson Valley of New York, a little city called Beacon, New York, right up the Hudson line. I didn't know anything about the Navy. I was fascinated with Chuck Norris and Chuck Norris movies. And my dad comes home one day with this book about Navy SEALs. And he's like, hey, you love the water. You love the ocean. You love being in lakes, rivers, pools, whatever. You should check these guys out and see what these guys do. Well, Michael, I stayed up till 5 o'clock in the morning that night, pounding through this Dick Marcinko book. And I read the entire thing. My mom comes out. She's like, whoa, you're up kind of early this morning. What are you doing up? And I said, Mom, I got to train. She's like, what are you talking about? I said, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. She rolls her eyes. She's like, oh my God, Bill, what are you feeding this guy? And that was it for me. I was dedicated. I was motivated. That's what I wanted to do. And we got to back up even actually a little bit more. Before that, my dad, around the age of 15, my dad comes home one day and he goes, "Hey, you're an entrepreneurial type of guy, Kyle. I love you're doing all these things." And at the time, I had a couple of small businesses as a 15-year-old. I started my first computer repair shop as a 12-year-old, actually, where I'd go around town in the early 90s and convert old ladies' computers from MS-DOS to Windows. My dad comes home one day and he goes, "Hey, you got to stop all these endeavors." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "I just quit my job at Sloan Kettering Cancer Hospital in New York." He was leading the media and graphics department there, the department head for the entire organization. And back in the 90s, he saw the digital camera was coming to light. He and his team would be in the operating room filming or taking pictures of high vis operations. Anyway, he decides to quit his job and go back to college because he wanted to be on the other side. He wanted to get into medicine. And so as a 14 or 15-year-old, an entrepreneur doing all this stuff, it rocked my world because I'm the oldest of 5 kids. And my dad's like, "You're going to help mom out around the house because we're going to be living off top ramen." And that's it. And so fast forward back to the story. I'm 17 years later. I just clawing. I want to get out of Dodge so bad because I want to go live my own life. I love my parents deeply. I have a great respect for them, a great relationship with them. But at the time, I just wanted to get out of Dodge. So my parents wouldn't sign for me to join the military. So literally on the morning of my 18th birthday, which is in February, I am sitting on the steps of the Navy recruiter's office at 8:59, waiting for them to open the door. The second they open the door, I sign the dotted line to become a Navy SEAL.
You could have, and this is an interesting pivot, you lay the predicate of entrepreneurial guy. You're already seeing ways to make money. For example, me, I was in my 20s in the 90s, and I started looking around once Netscape went public in 95. And I was like, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I better get something up online really fast because this is the gold rush. You're seeing this. You've got this entrepreneurial bent. There can be nothing no more different than to join the military.
Yeah, you're spot on because it's so regimented. And it's funny. I get asked this question a lot about Navy SEAL training. "Oh, how challenging was it? How hard was it?" And I'm not taking away from how hard it is. I am not. But the one thing about basic training in the Navy SEALs is it's mindless. It really is. You really don't have to think too much. In fact, you have to do the opposite. You have to remove the bad thoughts from your head and stop thinking and just obey and just do what the instructors tell you to do and don't quit. And so you don't have to think about food. It's provided. You don't really have to think about shelter. It's provided. You don't really need to think about equipment. You have to think about equipment maintenance, but the equipment's provided too, and on and on and on. You're so spot on, Michael, because the military, from an outsider perspective, especially from the beginning stages of the military, is very regimented. Now, on the flip side, it does evolve, and we do a phenomenal job in the military of taking advantage of that entrepreneurial spirit for individuals who have it.
Just to clarify here, see, what you're laying out is at the beginning, it's a rules-based approach. You get into it, but I think what you're hinting at is as things evolve, experience evolves, training evolves, your familiarity evolves, then the inside of this structure, an entrepreneurial window opens.
That's right. Very well said. A lot of people look at the Navy SEALs and they think of us as running and gunning and blowing stuff up and hunting down terrorists, which obviously we do that. But there's this other side of the coin, if you will, that we don't really talk about because it's not sexy. It wouldn't be sexy to show it on TV or CBS on a sitcom or whatever, is the side of the enterprise, which we actually run. There's no big gray man in the sky running the enterprise. It's us. It's the Navy SEALs. And what I mean by that is we run our supply chain. We run our global logistics. We run our budgets, our budgetary constraints, our operating procedures. We run all of our tactics, techniques, improvements to training. We build all of that. In fact, we run the enterprise.
But as you say that, to clarify, meaning there's not necessarily some one top of the food chain point person that continues to direct you. I guess what you're describing is this diffuse leadership across everyone.
That's right. Well said. And what I further mean is there's not a big department of the military that's running all of that for us. It's the Navy SEAL community that is doing that.
Keep it there for a second and give me some background, because obviously this is a high level area in our military, but how the hell did that get developed? There must have been some people on the ground very early on that were saying, hey, this isn't going to be just typical command and control.
Such a great rabbit hole. Well, first it started obviously in the 40s with our UDT, but eventually, I don't know if you know this, but JFK was actually the one who created Navy SEALs in 62. He was the one that said, hey, I want a naval special warfare force. And so since 1962, as we've professionalized our force, as we've sought increases to our budget, as we've increased our footprint from San Diego, Virginia Beach, eventually Hawaii, those are our big main three locations where we have major footprints, large bases that we own. Obviously, the Navy owns them. And with the evolution of JSOC, with the evolution of SOCOM, the United States Navy has been very supportive to allow the SEAL community to thrive and grow and evolve. That's a whole history lesson. My friend Ben does a phenomenal job in his book, Beneath the Water. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's a phenomenal book. Shout out, Ben, where he actually walks through in about 1,200 pages the entire history.
The structure.
Yeah.
I won't let you go through 1,200 pages.
By the way, I would fail at it miserably.
It's an amazing thing because generally across the military, if some big event happens, and gosh, everyone can look at the news right now and there's potential big events in potentially 2 theaters, but you guys are always going to be coming at this in a slightly different way versus the more traditional command and control. It's just really interesting. I'm going to have to go read, but to know the people that were leading at that point in time, structuring the SEALs, the visions they had, the different understandings, what they wanted to be able to do differently, just quite amazing.
Yeah. And I think it really leans into the team culture. Obviously, that's part of why I wrote my book, but I believe it really leans into the team culture of what was embedded in the SEALs from day one. It's SEAL team. It's not SEAL individual, it's SEAL team. And so through that, we have such a deep rooted culture around teamwork since day one. And from that, it's always been about, hey, replace yourself. Eventually you get to a place where you need to replace yourself as the leader. That obviously stems from the greater military, because the military in itself is just designed to replace yourself. And I think it's very interesting when you as a leader take a step back and you start looking at, hey, how can I replace myself? How should I be replacing myself in this role or that role so that I can go out and achieve bigger and greater things, but also at the same time, raise up the person beside me, below me, above me, even in that nature. So I think what it really lends to is we as leaders are constantly creating the next generation of leaders. By then, organically, it just improves the entire force.
I'm thinking back also to something you said a few minutes ago about the computers. I've held a job. I guess I worked in the Circuit City warehouse for a while and I bartended for 6 months. But I've not really held a job. I sold some computers in terms of buying open box Macs in the early 90s and reselling them for double the profit and all that stuff. But it strikes me, for someone like myself to listen to you, to think about where you're going, never being on a team, really, because I'm more in someone who's trading, writing books, whatnot. It's more in the artist, frankly, territory. You're almost just in that creative territory. So it's sometimes difficult for me to trust because I know I can expand my reach. There's people that work for me and all that stuff, but I know I can expand my reach, but I always find it challenging because there's so many people today where they don't really want it. They just want the gig. They just want the job, or they don't really know they want some of that leadership, or they've never experienced it. And so I see all those things, and it makes it very difficult for someone like me who did not have a chance to start in a structured environment with so many compatriots that are all thinking the same way as you, all training the same way as you. So in that way, I enjoy my entrepreneurial life, but I can be envious of that team approach too.
I get that. I really do, especially when I've started endeavors where it's you're one of one. You're one of one person, and to scale and take that next step, it depends. It depends on the outcome, the desired outcome that you wish to achieve, and does it require to scale? And I think, honestly, for that, Michael, it really comes back to what is that desired outcome? What does happiness look like? Do I need to scale, or am I truly, truly content in staying as a very nimble, agile team of one?
How long have you been in the SEAL? You're still active or no?
No, I retired in 2019. I did 20 years.
20 years. Gotcha.
I had a wonderful career.
Let's get into some examples, though, from this basic term leadership. Here you are on the front cover of your book, essentially kicking it in the ass. A lot of people are going to hear the word leadership, and generally it's not a pejorative. Generally it's something where people, hey, that sounds good. Everyone wants to be a leader, and we need leadership and all that kind of thing. But you're jumping right in the deep end by smacking it on the forehead. What was driving you out of the gate to decide? Because the way you've done it, it's clever is not the right word, but you're not saying leadership is something that we don't need, but you're describing a different form of leadership is essentially what you're doing.
Here's a fun story I hope you'll appreciate. In late December, and I've been working on this book, by the way, for 5 years, just because it's been a side project, a passion project, and we wanted to do it right. So back in 2020, right at the end of the year, I was actually wanting to call the book Kill the Leader.
That is chapter 1.
That is chapter 1. But we were going back and forth with our publisher on it. And then the storming of the Capitol happens. Trump's going through everything. And they were like, yeah, we are not calling that right now.
But today, though, do you wish it was called Kill the Leader?
No, I love the title. I think it'll lend itself better to a sequel.
I should say I've had trouble with publishers on titles. I got stuck with a half of a title that I still do not like 15 years later. So.
Oh, man. I'll learn from you. So anyway, I wanted to call it that because in 2011, the Obama administration had actually approved, or I had gotten sent or tasked, if you will, to go to southern Afghanistan to take on an unconventional warfare campaign, which means working by, through, and with the local population to establish democracy in a region, equivalent to county in New York or Texas or something. The platoon that I'm getting tasked with 2 weeks before they return from deployment, the hero, their hero, the lacrosse captain, Captain America himself, everyone loved this guy. His name was Brandon Looney. Literally 2 weeks before they return from deployment, his helicopter gets shot down. They come back, as you can imagine, resenting the action, resenting what had happened. It happened right at the end of the deployment. They're pissed off, as you can imagine. They're pissed off and they're angry and they want to take it out on something or someone. And he was going to be the OIC. I was going to be the TAC lead for that platoon. And here comes Kyle Buckett walking in. Hey, guys, I know you want to go back to Afghanistan and I know you want to be aggressive. We've got a new mission. The people that just killed Brandon, we're going to be working by, through, and with them, establishing democracy, helping them build a police force, helping them build security in the region. We're going to be talking to them on a daily basis, probably eating with them. Yeah, we're going to be doing that. That's our next deployment. I had to literally change, or at least work through, Rob and I had to literally work through changing the culture of the platoon to then go and try and change the culture in Afghanistan. So it was a double whammy. And at the time, how do you do this? How do I change a vibe? These guys are war fighters. These guys are incredible, elite athletes, all type alpha male, all very, very intelligent individuals. One of my new guys, in fact, on that platoon was a lawyer from Georgetown. I mean, these are not dumb guys. How do we tackle this problem set? And I didn't have a lot of resources available to me at the time. Dan Coyle's Culture Code was not available. At least I don't remember it. Our book obviously was not available, but there wasn't a lot of resources out there of how to do this, how to actually work through the platoon to try and reinvent ourselves, change the vibe, change the environment to then go over there and do it as well. That's where this really started. And that's where I started becoming very fascinated with the subject, if you will, of how do you change a culture? How do you mold a culture? How do you define a culture and then design it and then build it and then scale it and then sustain it? How do you do that? At that time, this is 2011, 2012, most of 2012, we were there. And so through 2 years, I'm getting very fascinated with this. Here we are 11 years later talking about it. So for about 11 years, I've been very fascinated with the subject of how do you actually do that?
I'm going to ask you a question that you may or may not want to answer or be able to answer. You're always welcome to just smile and wave me off. I grew up in the DC area, about 15 miles from DC. I've got a pretty damn good understanding of politics. I actually ran for political office when I was 21 in my infinite wisdom.
Oh, wow.
It's a great thing to see the media lie about you openly when you're 21. The rest of your life, you're like, yeah, I get how this works. Here's the question I've got for you. So you've got a presidential administration that says to you, to your team, the other guys, hey, and I'm paraphrasing here, you can tell me if I'm saying it the wrong way, we want to spread democracy in Afghanistan. Now, you had already been in Afghanistan. You've already got a lay of the landscape. And we all know what the exit ended up being. Am I guessing wrong that you knew from the get-go that there was never going to be any democracy in Afghanistan?
Yeah, at least for me. In my head at the time, whether right or wrong, whether I was lying to myself, wasn't fully aware, I was of the mindset and of the belief that we were actually going to try and win. What does win look like? Well, win looks like Germany. Win looks like the Philippines, Japan, Bahrain.
Not Vietnam.
Not Vietnam, right. But we have these enduring presences all across the world where we slowly over time have dribbled down our military presence and worked at a diplomatic relations solution for most of the problems. But at the time, I was thinking that that's what we were going to do. And we were going to do it through unconventional warfare, irregular warfare.
That's the second part of the question. Not only did you instinctively, intuitively, deep in your bones know that there was no way this place was going to be democracy, once you had enough of the lay of the landscape, did you also know there was going to be no win?
Well, you have to unpack that a little bit. I didn't really realize it till 3 years later. Now, if I'm wrong, please, if anyone listening wants to correct me, I would love to talk to you about it. Let's fast forward a couple of years later, if it's okay with you, Mike. I remember Michael Vickers at the time was the Undersecretary of Defense. I don't know if you ever seen Charlie Wilson's War with Tom Hanks. Mike Vickers is the young guy who's playing chess against three people at the same time in the park that they recruit to help them with the unconventional warfare campaign in Afghanistan. Well, fast forward 30 years later, he's now Undersecretary of Defense. He's one of the most well-spoken and also knowledgeable, more importantly, knowledgeable individuals on two things: irregular warfare, unconventional warfare, but also a subject matter expert on Afghanistan.
You are a subject matter expert on Afghanistan now, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
I just want to clarify.
I think so. Mike's one of my heroes, so I look up to him significantly, too. I'll never forget. He was helping to spearhead the efforts in Afghanistan at the time when I was there. In fact, he came and visited us. I talk about it in my book. It's a pretty cool story. But I think it was 2014, maybe early 15. I remember when he retired to spend time, air quotes, with the family. Immediately right around that time, we started backing out of an unconventional warfare campaign in Afghanistan, 2014. I will never forget it. That's the moment when I said, there's going to be a day 5 years in the future where people are going to be falling off of planes.
Was it possible to win in a place like Afghanistan?
Yes. However, it is a long, long battle.
Resources is an issue. It's not an unlimited budget, so that becomes an issue.
Sure, but it's all about strategy. We would have had to have had a long-term presence from SOF. Special forces have to run the mission over there. You have to allow special forces to run the strategy, to run the mission, and it's a long-term, enduring mission that has to last over 10, 15, 20 years. So to answer that, yes, it could take decades, but just because it takes decades doesn't mean that's the same footprint of American soldiers that are there for the entire duration. If SOF's running the mission, they're slowly over time going to be dwindling down their forces, their footprint, as they hand over tactics and procedures to the local population in time.
So now here we are years later, and you've been doing it for many more years. The autopsy of these events, of this time. Ultimately, there's all kinds of lessons involved, and you're mapping out to my audience quite clearly. We've all seen these in the movies and whatnot, but you're saying quite clearly there is a strategy that maybe gives us the chance to win, and then there's politics. How do the SEALs take these lessons? Again, can involve political lessons. How do you take that back into the labs, so to speak, when you're thinking about leadership, but then you're also dealing with the idea that you might be told to stand down, so to speak? This is quite interesting and complicated, and it's not fun as an outsider because, look, as an American, if we're going to do a conflict, a war, a task, a mission, whatnot, then you don't want to see American guys go into harm's way with one arm tied behind their back. That viscerally makes me infuriated. But I don't think enough people understand that this happens on the political side. So anyways, back to my question though, how do you take all these experiences that can involve strategy lessons, tactics lessons, on the ground lessons, and then you got the political lessons over here on the other side, and then you take it back and you guys are like constantly wanting to improve back to leadership, this diffuse group leadership. How does that unfold?
It's two parts. First and foremost, back to the morning where I'm 17 years and 365 days years old. It goes back to that moment in time where you're signing that dotted line. Every single individual, you're signing your life away and take orders. At the end of the day, that is the mission. Our job is to be a lean, mean fighting machine for the United States military. And so you've got to be okay with that. You've got to be okay with that. You have to understand that we have phenomenal, world-class elite leaders, but we also have some bad ones in the military. And so you might have to take an order or two or dozens or hundreds from a bad leader. That might happen. Now, I'm not going to get into the nuances of how you deal with that. If it's wrong, I mean, if it's criminal orders, there's obviously ways to deal with that, but I'm not going to talk about that. My point is that number one, you've got to understand that, hey, you're there to be a lean, mean fighting force and to constantly sharpen that knife's edge as a SEAL and get better and improve your craft. And your team's job is to constantly improve as a team, both with tech adoptions, tech implementations, hardware implementations, new armory, new weapons, et cetera, et cetera. That's their job, is to constantly be improving and getting better on their capabilities. That's number one. And then number two to that point is, how do we then, as a fighting force, ensure that we are going after the specific missions that we want to go after? Well, it really goes back to number one, is improving our capabilities. It goes back to constantly sharpening that knife's edge. I know it sounds simple. It is simple, but it's very challenging to achieve.
If I think of the acronym that you guys have to live, VUCA acronym, and I think of geography, Yes, we got volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And I think a geography like a place like Afghanistan, now obviously you've had a chance to be at a lot of different places, perhaps some places you can admit to, some places you can't admit to. Know how that works. But it must have been an amazing training ground, the little bit that I know about Afghanistan in terms of geography, in terms of leadership lessons that must have come from this terribly unique geography.
Oh, yeah. Talk about different challenges. Because, I mean, you have a desert, arid environment. You can have somewhat of a tropical to a degree environment, definitely, obviously, woodland, obviously, mountains, obviously, snow, very high terrain, high angle, shooting, if you will. You name it. You're right. It's almost the full spectrum. The only thing you don't have is the ocean, but you got some lakes and rivers.
Let me keep it in Afghanistan for one more second. I'm curious also how you would sum up the competition, because I'm assuming that many of the competitors, so to speak, that you had to go against in Afghanistan, they were working with diffuse leadership. They were not all command and control. It must have been a really interesting challenge. Were they a mirror of you in some way?
Very agile, very interdependent, very non-dependent on each other. That's what makes it so challenging. Talk about a spider web. If one faction or one group was taken out, it didn't necessarily matter to the entire groups, plural, the entire organization, because there was a lot of different fractions, if you will, that were all working towards the same thing, but they are somewhat of a leaderless organization. And that's what really made it challenging for us at the beginning, is everyone was thinking Osama bin Laden is giving orders at the tactical level, which obviously he was not. And so at the tactical level, they are running and gunning and executing and completing missions and operations, all self-dependent. Very, very alone and unafraid, in the sense that they're just trying to achieve their overall mission and goal. And how they do that is, to a degree, on them.
A somewhat admirable strategy from their standpoint?
I totally agree. Absolutely. Especially when you're combating the big US machine, because then it's a leaderless organization that very, very challenging for us to tackle. Very challenging.
I could keep you with these stories forever, but let me shift you to something hypothetical. I'm sure it's happened to you in your retirement age now. I don't know how old you are, but you don't look too old.
Thank you.
Let's say you get the call, some kind of consulting call, and somebody wants you to come in and they want you to assess. Maybe it's a startup, a tech startup. I don't know. You can use whatever example you want, but how do you typically walk into, here you are, you've got this unique experience that we've described in this conversation. How do you walk into the private sector now, leaving the military, walk into the private sector and walk into a room full of people? Because here I am. I'm pretty good at this in the sense I'll eventually dig out a lot of what makes you tick. Of course, I've never experienced any of your training, but I can start to understand and dig it out. But I think a lot of people might be, if you walk in the room, maybe they're intimidated. How do you walk into a room, assess the people in that room, in the private sector, let's say a startup tech company, and start to bring them into some of the leadership lessons and mindsets that you have? How do you bring them in when, let's be frank, we can look at some of the generations right now in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and they're preoccupied with a lot of things today that are strange, to say the least. There's a lot of mental energy being spent on things that really don't have anything to do with the cost of tea in China. So how do you do this? How do you go in and get them to come to your side?
With kindness. But more importantly, when we walk in, we ask whoever hiring team is, hey, what's your overall objective? What's your mission? What's the problem that you're focused on right now? What's the problem that you want us to help with? How can we be helpful? And I know that sounds elementary, but obviously you got to set the expectation right off the bat. And then very simultaneously, we also ask the team when the leader's not around, what is the problem in your viewpoint? Because the truth is somewhere in between. The truth is always somewhere in between. And then we just step back and we listen, we observe, we don't rock the boat. We just try to really find out what the true problem is. And then it's conversations, having conversations with the leader, having conversations with the teams, with the leadership of the teams, and really understanding what the problem is. And a lot of times it might be communication or a communication platform, implementation, or how the communication is structured, a million different variations of what it could be. But to walk in first, just with kindness, with approachability, has been our key to success. Walking in and saying, hey, we're on the same team now, guys and gals. We are on the same team. We're all in it together. It's not me versus you. I'm here to literally help us all win. You win. When you win, I win. And we actually structure our contracts in that sense too, so that we ensure when our clients win, that's when we win as well. So we focus on, hey, how can we all be a team together? Because that's obviously my background is teamwork. If I were to come in and be an outsider that's just looking to shake things up or remove members from the team, as opposed to actually giving team members a platform to improve themselves or leaders to improve themselves, then what kind of teamwork is that? That's not what we're trying to do.
What's the number one thing, 1, 2, or 3, whatever example you want to use, that when you go in and you bring this Navy SEAL team perspective to a private operation, a private corporation, what are some of the aha moments that just regular folks, maybe they're excited to be in an entrepreneurial startup, maybe it's just a career job, but what are some of the aha moments where you really get people to see something entirely different?
I'll tell you, it's fascinating. One of the biggest aha moments for me has been the keep it simple, stupid methodology to a degree, in the sense of, hey, what are some of the basics or fundamentals that everyone's so dang busy right now in working on their little wheelhouse or their department or whatever we're doing, and they forget some of just the basic principles of how we structured this business or how we're structuring our battle rhythm, how we're structuring our rituals, whatever it might, our chants, our vibe, our environment. What are some of the very, very simple principles that we are just completely forgetting or ignoring around communication, working with the team, or how we're operating, how we form new teams, how we close out a project and not just let a project just fizzle and fizzle and fizzle and take up resources. It's very interesting to watch as you come in, because obviously you have an outsider perspective view, to walk into an organization and then just take a step back and go, wait, why do you guys do it this way? Oh, we always have. Oh, that's just how we've always done it. Oh, okay. And why haven't we changed it to just make it more productive and streamlined and effective? We're just too busy. Oh, okay. So, I mean, it's fascinating because everyone thinks, back to what we were talking about earlier, is Navy SEALs running, gunning, and blowing stuff up. But what really our secret is, we do the basics better than anyone else, meaning we pull a trigger on an AK better than anyone else. We pull a cord out of a parachute, or our hand posture when we're flying through the air, free falling, better than anyone else. We can swim faster than anyone else. We can run faster. It's all the basic stuff that makes us very unique. We can communicate very calmly. We call it comms brevity, communication brevity. We can communicate to each other better than anyone else. In fact, one of my favorite things about the SEAL community is how efficient the communication can be on the battlefield between units. You would think it's on a movie where people are screaming at each other. In real life, actually, with units that are efficient and awesome in what they do, when you listen to their radio communication, it is clean. It is really clean. Like, roger that.
As I said, that I was living in, so I thoroughly enjoyed looking out the window every now and again and watching you guys practice landing on second base at Petco. That was always cool.
It comes back to those basics.
Let me take it to a word that I think is important to me. I don't get a chance to live it as much per se. Obviously, it's an unusual story, perhaps, that someone like myself is here in Ho Chi Minh City for 11 years. But I love the word hero. What does hero mean to you?
That's a deep one. Heroes to me are the ones that are not just the military. Obviously, my life is littered with the heroes around me in the military, and I'm not taking anything away from that at all. But the root of the word to me is really someone who is putting themselves to the side for the greater good, or the greater good of a group, the greater good of an objective, or for others, laying down one's life for another man or woman, in the sense of not just laying your life down per se, but giving it your all to achieve an objective that is now going to impact humanity. That to me is easier said than done. To really, really go after and achieve something that is really going to be an uphill battle with mud littered around it all the way up the hill. And you're just trying to consistently go after and improve something or help a group or a population, if you will, to actually achieve greatness. I think it's remarkable when you see individuals who have done things like that.
When you showed up at age 18 on that stoop to sign up and sign the dotted line, it sounds like you had a quality upbringing. Were there certain principles that you had that carried over, or did you show up as a blank slate and they programmed you, so to speak? It seems like, I'm guessing, if I was to talk to you at age 18, you're not going to be exactly the same, but I'm guessing there's a lot that came along with you. So give me an idea about that, though, in terms of what principles you had, life principles you had. And of course, you can't even go into how much you've learned and how much you were augmented, but how did that unfold, the principles you had and the change that took place in you?
Sure. Well, I came from a Judeo-Christian background. I grew up in the Christian church. My parents are both believers and wonderful, wonderful people. I mean, oaks in the faith. I had that as my foundation growing up as a kid. Translate that, fast forward, I'm in the military, and that's the foundation on top of that, which was the military's foundation as well. To have a foundational belief system, the 10 Commandments, if you will, as a founding principle of your life helped me and guided me. And then you walk into the military at a young age, and you're obviously so impressionable, and you see all walks of life. I'll never forget it. My bunkmate in boot camp, I'm 18 years old, and I was so grateful because you look back at how blessed you are. Because my bunkmate in boot camp, he's literally screaming one night, 2:00 in the morning, having night terrors. The next morning, I'm like, hey, dude, you all right, man? Can I pray with you or something? And he tells me that when he was 7 years old, his dad shot his mom with a shotgun in their front yard while he and his little sister were watching on the front porch, and then shot himself in the head. I'm like, I had the best life in the world. My point of why I say that is you see all these different walks of life, and you might think in the moment, back to my opening, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. The life's so challenging. And then I hear his story and I'm like, oh my God. That night, wrote my mom a big long letter of how much I loved her and how grateful I was for her and my dad and all that stuff. It really boils down to gratitude at the end of the day, because you realize no matter where you are in life, there's thousands, if not millions or billions of people. And in you and I's case, literally billions and billions of people that are much far worse off than we are today.
Well, yeah, I get a chance to live that every day. Even though this is a growing economy and everything, you still see the disparity. But I got to tell you, there's something, not with you, not with your peers, and there's plenty of Americans that have got the hustle gene, but I got to tell you, you come to some places, especially in Asia, and if they don't have their economics maxed out yet, that hustle gene is endearing, man. When you see grandma on the sidewalk with a smile on her face and she's selling mango slices next to the 100-story tower, it's not about saving people. Everyone's at their own place at their own time, and every family is moving along on the through line. But the hustle gene is, man, I love to be around the people with the hustle gene.
I couldn't agree more. My wife's half Mexican, a little jaded there, but in a good way. Bias is a better word. But we love going to Mexico. Back when we were in San Diego, we'd go there 12 times a year, once a month. But now living in Texas, we try to get back 2-3 times a year. You see the hustle gene down in Mexico. And I know I'm stereotyping, but man, oh man, there is a hustle gene in Mexico. And when you see people coming from Mexico into America by the droves, you cannot deny that hustle gene and that hard work ethic. You just cannot deny it. It's incredible.
Cool stuff, man. I tell you what, if you're ever interested in me taking you down the rabbit hole of a much longer, unpredictable conversation, I would love to take you down that path. I don't know where we would end up. Maybe you can't even go there. Maybe you could already detect that I'm going to keep probing and prying, and you're going to be like, oh my God, I've got to put my diplomacy cap on with this character.
No, it's all good. I welcome it. This has been wonderful.
But the book, Leadership is Overrated, How the Navy SEALs and Successful Businesses Create Self-Leading Teams That Win. Win is another great word. Win is just a great freaking word. If people have not had a chance in their lifetime to win, I was a baseball catcher for 10 years. I played into college.
Me too.
Were you?
Yeah. I didn't play in college, but I was a catcher too. It's the best position. Bravo to you.
It's the best, man. Okay, now we probably can relate even more where it's like, as a pitcher, you're controlling the game a lot, but all the other positions in baseball, I mean, hitting's fun, but God, catcher's the best, man.
Yeah. It's a little side note. I moved from San Diego to Texas, and my kids are young. My kids are 5, 8, and 10 years old. So we're not fully in the Texas athletics just yet. We got smaller stuff going, but we're not at the high school, at the varsity level. I'm telling you, when I came here to Texas, I mean, you see Friday night.
It's serious shit.
You see Friday Night Lights and you're like, oh, yeah. But when you're here and you're living it, you're like, holy moly, this is just next level. How does any other state compete? I mean, I was at a baseball game and there's a junior from high school throwing 102 miles an hour. And there's 32 scouts behind home plate doing this with their radar guns on every pitch. This place is next level.
My buddy is the coach at a high school in Virginia that just won the Virginia state title.
Oh, nice.
His best player was just picked by the Giants in the first round, 16th pick. Pretty amazing stuff. Hey, let me ask you, as a baseball catcher, do you find that I find now, I'm a huge yoga nut and I do this hardcore yoga stuff, but I tell you what, man, the catcher, Asian squat, splits, my lower body flexibility is amazing from being a catcher for all those years.
Wow, that's great. Good for you.
Has it stayed with you at all?
No, not.
Did you get all injured up in this little career that you undertook?
I have to consistently stretch. I'm stretching 15 to 20 minutes a day throughout the day. If you see me right now, I'm on a stand desk guy. I've been at a stand desk for the last 6 to 8 years because of lower extremity injuries or upper neck injury, shoulder injury. I have to constantly stay on top of my stretching game.
Are you physically okay at a high level though?
At a high level, yes. But if I did not take care of it, if I didn't do preventative maintenance, it would go down pretty fast.
Hey, where can we send people, Kyle? Where can people come check you out? Amazon for the book, all that fun stuff. But where would you like to send them to?
Thanks for asking. You can find us on leadershipisoverrated.com, the title of our book.
Again, book, Amazon, all that kind of fun stuff. Kyle, I appreciate it, man.
Michael, this has been wonderful. You've been such a great host. Thanks for having me.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.